one thing I could say, trust me when I say most of the time acquisitions are a lot harder than they look. And it may be worth it to like think about, could I have built this thing because I understand my customers' needs more than they do.
Hi, I'm Chris Sugden, managing partner at Edison Partners and your host of Electrifying Growth. This is Sit Down with Sugden, where I share from my experiences as both the investor and an operator to help you get that next stage of growth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sit Down with Sugden. Thanks for joining me. In one of our most recent discussions, we talked a lot about how CEOs can oftentimes create this sort of rush of activity and therefore lots of running to bright, shiny objects, and how that can really hurt an organization because people get distracted. Time is money, and a lot of times time can be wasted because the CEO's got a big idea. And that often comes in the form of a customer said, if we just did this, we could win their business. Well, just doing this sounds simple in a sales meeting, but it's a lot more. So we talked a lot about what are some telltale signs of the CEO is in some ways your own worst enemy as a company because there's a lot of activity being changed, the priorities being changed. Kind of the flip side of that coin, and we talked, just to be clear, about taking a tactical pause, as they call it at West Point, at the U.S. Military Academy, when they think about the fog of war and there's a lot of incoming inputs are coming. It's sort of like a company when you think about it, because you don't have perfect information. One part of the organization is telling you one thing, one customer is telling you one thing, another customer is telling you another. There is this sort of element of, in small growing companies, there's no such thing as perfect information. We need more data. That'll always be the case. So again, this tactical pause, it ties a little bit to a military sort of saying and what they think about when they're in the middle of an operation, if you will. But it does apply in many ways to small companies. Let's just flip the coin over and say, is it possible to over-prioritize? Is it possible you're so regimented, for lack of a better word, so some people might call bureaucratic? And does that create its own set of challenges? I would just offer that we see this problem a lot less than than the first one. So the idea that small companies over-prioritize, that said, as you get larger, and we're in this industry, growth equity, private equity, that has playbooks for everything. And we frankly think very highly of those playbooks because they help you as a CEO, as an executive team to get scale. Because how does a new person walking into a company that you just hired figure out how things work? If I have a playbook to go to, that's really helpful. That's an example of being frankly very regimented, think about scalability, et cetera. Is it possible that over-prioritization, too much playbooking, creates bureaucracy, creates process getting in the way of progress? And I would say rarely on the journey, and I'll use revenue, which I tend to use a lot because I think about everyone's trying to grow. If you're not a growth company, generally in tech, you're not really going to be a necessarily successful company relative to valuation. So how do we think about when it is that maybe too much prioritization could become a bad thing? I think that really falls to a couple of things. Number one, as founders or entrepreneurial-led companies, you tend to be the chief product officer. You tend to be the visionary for the product. If you're starting to find yourself unable to spend any time in that world, now your roadmap is starting to be less important to you because you are so focused on kind of the month, the quarter ahead of you. I'll say these tend to be bigger company problems, but at times you can see this in smaller companies because innovation and what's next stops being a topic because we're so focused on, we got to hit our quarter, our year. And all of a sudden you look down and you go, wait, the market around us shifted. And here we are in the middle of an AI revolution, right? In some ways, innovation should be easier than it's ever been because I can ask my favorite LLM, how should I think about my product roadmap? You can literally push your product roadmap now into whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Grok, and you're going to get some answers back that are kind of interesting. So this should be much less a problem because AI should help you with this. But I think the way to think about it really is, do I have a certain percentage of revenue or bookings that I'm going to get in a year that's from new product? And if you've gone, beyond 1 year and you're into the second year where new product isn't driving any new opportunity, new revenue, you're probably you'll start to find yourself in a product deficit because the world you're operating in isn't stagnant. particularly again with AI going on around you. So I think, again, I hate to overdo this topic of over prioritization or too much organization be a bad thing, because generally it's not. It's generally the lesser of the evils, if you will. But we do see it on occasion. And I think one of the things to really consider, again, I'm using revenue as a benchmark. You get north of 20, you're headed to 30, you're headed to 50 million of ARR. Have you stopped and actually created a product organization? And now sometimes a product organization also feels in itself bureaucratic, because you're going to hire a chief product officer or a VP of product that's going to bring some process, bring some vetting. But I'll say really good CPOs, chief product officers, or VPs of product, they know there's a balance between how do I rein in this entrepreneur? It's got a million ideas, but how do I also create a venue for creativity? And that should be a partnership with the CEO. Because again, until you get really big, we have found that at the end of the day, while a CPO title may exist for someone in product, the CEO really is a visionary and they know where this thing's going. Again, particularly product or tech oriented CEOs are really in this mold. But think in terms of, if I don't have a product organization, how am I even thinking about product roadmap, testing, data, et cetera, et cetera? And most of the time, if you're a CEO and you've got 5 or 6 different hats you're wearing, you're back to our last episode where a new product is a bright, shiny object, as opposed to a process created to then figure out if this product's going to work. So in some ways, I'm challenging you to say too much prioritization, too much playbooking could be a challenge, but new ideas without any process around them, that becomes the other problem we just talked about in the last episode. Now I'm running around creating a big, dustbin of opportunity and issues and time being taken, but no results on the other end. So think long and hard about how much revenue you've gotten beyond double digits in revenue. This is sort of a problem for the second wave or third wave of your company's growth, because a lot of times one product should get you to a pretty significant amount of revenue. And again, focus generally tends to be the thing we're stressing more than new things. But as you're getting north of 20, headed to 50 in revenue, you probably need a second product. Yes, you can upsell your customers with a new product. But if I don't have a really good product roadmap and I got to buy something, I got to be in an acquisition mode. One thing I could say, trust me when I say, most of the time acquisitions are a lot harder than they look. And it may be worth it to think about, could I have built this thing because I understand my customers' needs more than they do? So as we think about over prioritization, too much regimenting, stifling creativity, challenge yourself to say, how much revenue in 26 or in 27 am I getting from new product? Or even said a different way, how much budget am I allocating to new product and then test to see if there's enough of a thesis here to go expand it? So give yourself, Google has the famous, you'll hear as little as 10%, as much as 20%. Every employee gets time to sort of create. Your company should be the same way. And it may not be able to be 20% of a budget, but could it be 5%? Could it be X hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, given your size, to be able to target new things with some measurables that say those new things are working? So again, focus tends to be the bigger challenge, as we talked about in the last episode, but too much focus can also lead to lack of innovation. And you look down and you realize you hadn't really put any new product out there for multiple years. That's probably not a good thing, because most likely you're not going to be a multi-$100 million business without multiple products. Occasionally, I refer to Google. Obviously, the search bar did wonders for that company, but they were innovating behind the scenes in a lot of ways, things we didn't see from a search perspective, and how they're selling advertising as well. So it may not always be a new product. It may be a new way to bring your product to market. We also talked in the last episode about channels and partnerships and how they can be, in many ways, the distraction. They're really exciting, but then they don't get anything out of them. Instead of a new product, that might be a way to approach the market through channels or partners as you've gotten bigger. So innovation can come in the flavor of, we're just going to innovate our go-to-market versus build a whole new product. Bottom line, as I think about this topic of, is too much priority a bad thing? Is too much regiment a bad thing? Think about it in terms of a benchmark. How much revenue am I bringing in this year on new customer, new product? But then secondly, say, if over the course of 2 years, that's a lot closer to zero than something meaningful, you might have an innovation challenge coming upon you. because we all know build the product, bring it to market, get it to scale. That's a multi-quarter, if not multi-year investment. So think about this in terms of a longer term than just quarter to quarter, maybe over 24 months, and really measure how much am I bringing in from new. Again, this tends to be you're north of 20, you're north of 30, you're north of 40 million before you really start to feel like you need a multi-product kind of company. But don't put it off too long, because then it becomes a different challenge. You just don't have the skills and the muscle to build new. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.